My brave lad, he sleeps in his faded coat of blue. In a lonely grave alone lies the heart that beats so true. They will find him and know him amongst the good and true, when a robe of white is given for that faded coat of blue. No more the bugle.
Welcome to War of the Rebellion, Stories of the Civil War. I am your host, Leon Mauser, and this is a reading of the regimental history under the Maltese Cross, Antietam to Appomattox, the Loyal Uprising in western Pennsylvania, 1861 to 1865, campaign's 155th Pennsylvania Regiment, narrated by the rank and file. Chapter 8. The Battle of Gettysburg. Thursday, July 2nd, 1863, near Gettysburg. 5th Corps rests a few hours in position on battlefield. Toward noon, on reserve near center of army. General Meade's order read to army. Sykes Corps changes position to Powers Hill. Troops rest and sleep. Amusement indulged in just previous to the great battle. Weed's brigade occupies Little Round Top. Desperate fighting on Little Round Top. Enemy repulsed by Weed's brigade. Perfect range of enemy's sharpshooters. Bucktails and Burden's sharpshooters. Scores of dead Confederate sharpshooters found in rocks and crevices of Devil's Den after the battle. Tremendous artillery fire against Little Round Top. Grand attacking column led by General Hood. Assaulting column of Texan troops. Robertson's brigade of Texans assault the 155th. Colonel Kane's order to regiment to aim low and fire. Pennsylvania reserves advance and clear the slope of Confederate sharpshooters. No midnight attack in front of Little Round Top. Fine view from Little Round Top in afternoon of 3rd. Pickett's charge. Thursday, July 2nd, 1863, marked the opening of the Battle of Gettysburg to the 155th Pennsylvania. At 4:00 a.m., this day the troops of General Sykes' 5th Corps were aroused from their slumbers and resumed the march westward. Being welcomed along the road nearing Gettysburg by many of the inhabitants, who freely distributed fresh bread, cakes, milk, and other food to the worn-out soldiers, and relieved the drooping spirits of the troops with encouraging words as they passed. The 155th did not fail to receive its full share of these good farmers' provisions, thus distributed by their wives and families. The march continued until within 2 miles of the town of Gettysburg, the vicinity of the battlefield of the day previous. 5th Corps forms reserve of army. The first position taken by the 5th Corps was in the rear of the positions held by Generals Hancock and Howard, and the 1st Corps on the day previous. From this, after a few hours' rest, towards noon, the position of the 5th Corps, aggregating about 20,000 men, was changed so as to make it the reserve corps of the army and placed near the center, ready in any emergency when the enemy attacked, to be signaled or called to the relief of the threatened quarter. While the 155th halted here, with the other regiments of Weed's brigade, the troops were massed in close column by divisions, in the rear of the troops who were deployed in line of battle with skirmishers advanced. The preparations all indicated the near proximity of the enemy in force. Of course, at this time, the geography of the battlefield was entirely unknown to the men of the 155th, but from the knowledge they have gained since, the regiment was to the right or eastward of Culp's Hill. It was a while waiting in that line of battle in reserve that Colonel Kane, in obedience to orders received, read to the regiment in a most impressive and significant manner a printed order from General Meade, the new commander of the Army of the Potomac, and indeed the same order which is given below was read to every regiment in the brigade. Quote, Headquarters, Army of the Potomac, June 30th, 1863. The commanding general requests that, previous to the engagement soon expected with the enemy, corps and all other commanding officers address their troops, explaining to them the immense issue involved in the struggle. The enemy is on our soil. The whole country looks anxiously to this army to deliver it from the presence of the foe. Our failure to do so will leave us no such welcome as the swelling of millions of hearts with pride and joy at our success would give to every soldier of the army. Homes, firesides, and domestic altars are involved. The army has fought well heretofore. It is believed that it will fight more desperately and bravely than ever if it is addressed in fitting terms. Corps and other commanders are authorized to order the instant death of any soldier who fails to do his duty at this hour, by command of Major General Meade, S. Williams, Assistant Adjutant General." Unquote. Colonel Kane, as required by this order, also addressed the regiment in earnest and convincing terms. The scene, action, and words were of intense and dramatic interest. So many of the comrades of each company of the regiment, worn out and exhausted by the march, had dropped out of the ranks that the companies, as they stood and listened to this order, looked very small, not averaging more than 30 men to each company. Solicitude was also felt by many anxious messmates for comrades who had straggled without permits, and who had not been able to overtake the regiment up to the reading of this drastic order. Stragglers nearly missed the battle. On the forced marches to Gettysburg, daily medical inspections of each company was held immediately after roll call, the object being to examine the sick and exhausted and to issue proper passes excusing from duty those unable to maintain place in the ranks. While there may have been some who desired these excuses and were not anxious to participate in the impending battle, it is simple justice to state that such cases were exceptional, as many instances of comrades well entitled to be excused occurred where they persisted under the greatest difficulties in marching and keeping up with the company and participated in the great battle. An instance illustrating this feeling is also indicating how two worthy comrades came near missing the Battle of Gettysburg occurred on the morning of June 30th, 1863, the day before the opening of the battle. At the morning roll call and inspection, a private appeared in ranks with his well-worn shoes dangling from the muzzle of his musket instead of on his feet. It was explained that his feet were too sore and blistered to allow him to wear shoes, and that he contemplated going into battle barefooted. Assistant Surgeon Wilson issued the usual pass, excusing the private from duty and bespeaking mercy in case he straggled and fell into the hands of the inexorable detail of the United States regulars serving as division provost guards. Soon after the march was resumed, this barefooted private kindly loaned his pass to his two messmates, and at the first halt these comrades made 2 copies of same, inserting, however, in each their own names as beneficiaries. The private, owing the genuine pass, stuck to the company and declined using its privilege. His 2 messmates fell out of the ranks early in the day and failed to report at the night's halt or to be present at roll call the next morning. The company became solicitous for the missing men, who were both known as ideal brave soldiers, and fears were entertained that they would be disgraced by absence without leave in the impending battle. Just a half hour before the order issued to the 5th Corps to double quick to the left of the battlefield to the relief of General Sickles in the peach orchard, the 2 tardy soldiers were spied emerging from nearby woods and joined the company in time for the battle. On reaching the summit of Little Round Top, one of these comrades, who was a color corporal, Thomas J. Tomer, fell badly wounded. His barefooted messmates, Private O'Neill and McKenna, came to his relief and helped him back a few yards, where an immense boulder furnished him shelter until the stretcher-bearers conveyed him to the nearest field hospital. From the Reminiscences of the Gettysburg Campaign by General A. L. Pearson, published in the Pittsburgh Sunday Critic, July 20th, 1880, the following extracts are given of incidents occurring on the forced marches to Gettysburg in which further allusions are made to the incidents mentioned by Assistant Surgeon Wilson. Early in the morning of July 1st, before resuming the forced march for Gettysburg, Colonel Kane, commanding the regiment, detailed me to conduct an inspection of the men of the regiment with the assistant surgeons, Reed and Wilson, and to order those found to be unfit to continue the marches to the hospital ambulances in the rear. The inspection resulted in finding over 50 men, barefooted, unable to wear shoes, broken down, and too much exhausted to resume marching. These men were ordered to report to the hospital ambulances. Among those ordered out of the ranks into the rear as unfit for duty, I recall the names of Sergeant James A. McMillan of Company B, the most stalwart man of the command. Also, Sergeant William F. Colner of Company G, and Privates Noah H. Pangburn and Charlie McKenna of Company E. The forced marches and the streams they had waded, the sand and pebbles getting into their shoes, had so blistered and bruised their feet as to prevent their wearing their shoes. The men I have just named, with a number of others whom I cannot recall, refused to obey the orders to go to the rear to the hospital ambulances, claiming that, as they were on Pennsylvania soil, with an impending battle so close, they would struggle to remain with their companies and do their best to keep up. Assistant Surgeon Wilson thereupon prepared formal passes, which I countersigned, excusing each of the 4 men named from all duty, and authorizing them to fall out of the ranks with immunity from arrest by the provost guards. Colner, McKenna, and Pangburn each mentioned to reach the regiment in line of battle in time to participate in the storming and capture of Little Round Top. Sergeant McMillan's fate was pathetic and extremely distressing. While bravely following his comrades on this day's forced march under the broiling sun, he completely broke down and became wholly unconscious, during which he conveyed by ambulance to a hospital at Frederick. His case was developed into a severe attack of typhoid fever. The Battle of Gettysburg was over fully 6 weeks before he was sufficiently restored to understand how he had missed the battle and came to be in a hospital ward. It was the only battle of the 32 to the credit of the regiment that he missed. Sykes' corps soon changed its position, and during the greater part of the remainder of that day, all the regiments composing it lay upon Powers Hill, about a mile eastward from the spot where the 155th Monument now stands on Little Round Top. In this position, the regiments were permitted to rest and make up for the loss of sleep and fatigue of the night and day before, although throughout the day the frequent sound of cannon firing could be heard, which, however, seemed far away and did not disturb the slumbers of the weary troops of the division. Indeed, as the afternoon wore away, and the men wakened and cooked their meals everywhere, there was evident the best of spirits and joviality, strangely in contrast with the harvest of sorrow and death so soon to follow. Many of the survivors of the regiment will recall that the few hours immediately preceding the great battle on Little Round Top were enlivened by the singing by fellow officers and men of many of the favorite camp songs and choruses, Lorena, the Virginia Lowlands, and Listen to the Mockingbird, etc., by many of the officers. Other amusements were indulged in, and everywhere demonstrations of a cheerful character were visible during the few hours resting in reserve. This was also particularly true of the camp of the United States Regulars of Ayres Division, the immediate neighbors of the 155th. Discipline seemed to be relaxed to a great extent. The fact that a battle was imminent appeared to have no disheartening effect upon the lively spirits ever present in the veterans of the regular army. During this eventful rest, opportunities to see more of the officers of the brigade were afforded. Many of the men of the 3rd Brigade had not seen General Stephen H. Weed, their new commander, until this occasion, as he had only joined the marching column a few days before at Aldie. But he was seen at this time in the day conversing and seemingly enjoying himself with Colonel O'Rourke of the 140th New York, his immediate predecessor in command of the brigade. Colonel O'Rourke seemed so gay and light-hearted as he chanted familiar lines, in less than 1 hour after the pleasant social intercourse of the gallant young officers named at this point of rest and bivouac with their men, both lay dead amid the rocks of Little Round Top, both victims of the unerring aim of the Confederate sharpshooters concealed in the Devil's Den. The capture of Little Round Top is where we will be picking up next week, and I know this is only a 15-minute episode, but I am supplementing that with a surprise for you. That's my ice machine. That I have been keeping all to myself. Not the ice machine. But before we get into the official Let's Chat part of this episode, regimental histories were not the only form of histories that were written during the Civil War and after, but now I share to you a second book, a company history that is specific to the 155th Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry Regiment, but from Company K. And I will leave to you a link so that you can finish this brief history in a day or so if you really commit to it, or a week if you take a little longer. However, a lot of very interesting soldier details that cannot be covered in the official history make it into this smaller one much easier. And I don't have a big enough following to quit my job and read 2 books at the same time. However, for the here and now, I shall read you a small section from this history of Company K, 155th Pennsylvania Volunteer Zouaves, a detailed history of its organization and service to the country during the Civil War from 1862 until the collapse of the rebellion, together with many incidents and reminiscence of the camp, the march, and the battlefield, also much of the history of the grand old 155th. By D.P. Marshall and assisted by J.A. Klein and W.D. Porter. This section that I'm about to read is from Chapter 7. Goheenville, Armstrong County, Pennsylvania, January 17th, 1888. To the reader, it is with reluctance that I relieve Lieutenant D.P. Marshall and assume the duty of giving the part taken in the Gettysburg campaign by Company K of the 155th Regiment, Pennsylvania Volunteers. After the war, when the eventful period was fresh in my memory, I reviewed and rewrote a part of my army letters. It is from that I give this brief history. It was the only battle in which the company participated that Lieutenant Marshall was absent, and that through no fault of his own. He became crippled, but marched when he could, make no advance with one foot. He would step a long distance with the well limb and bring the other on a line with the one ahead. His claim of being the largest man in the Union Army has not been disputed. He was a good soldier and a good officer, as everyone in the company will testify. He was old enough to understand the nature of the contest and was more deeply interested in the result than those of less mature years. That is the only way I can account for his perseverance under difficulties. W.D. Porter. Gettysburg Campaign. From Poolesville, Maryland, back to Beverly, Pennsylvania. June 27th, 1863. After our hard march of the previous day, we were again on the move at 4 a.m. and marched to within a few miles of Frederick City, Maryland, fording the Monocacy. The valley from the Potomac to that point was quite a contrast to the sandy plains and untilled fields of the Old Dominion. It seemed like passing from Hades into paradise. We thought we never saw such a number of beautiful fields of golden grain, almost ready for the reaper. We marched on the roads and did no damage to property in that locality. Sunday, 28th. Remained encamped and enjoyed a much-needed rest. We were informed of the change in commanders. General Meade, our corps commander, assumed command of the Army of the Potomac in place of General Hooker. The change placed General Sykes in command of the corps. General Ayres, a regular officer in command of our division, and General Meade of the brigade. When the time of the 9-month men expired, the 155th and 91st Pennsylvania were transferred to the 2nd Division and brigaded with the 140th and 146th New York. The other two of the brigades of the division were regulars. The division at that time was commanded by General Sykes. Monday, June 29th, we were again on the move. We marched hard on that day, also Tuesday and Wednesday and part of the night, arriving within a few miles of Gettysburg. On the march, the report was circulated that General McClellan had command of the army, but the battle was not fought under that impression, as has been stated. Before we were engaged, an order was read from General Meade, commander, to, quote, shoot anyone who would attempt to leave the ranks or go to the rear without orders, unquote. Our march from the Rappahannock in Virginia through Maryland and into Pennsylvania, considering the season and oppressive heat, was a trying one. The troops were longing for battle or anything that would stop the everlasting tramp from morning until night and from day to day. There were those in Frederick City who were ever ready to welcome the Union troops, and they did it with a will. But the citizens on our route in Adams County, Pennsylvania, we considered similar to those in Virginia. If it had been for their salvation alone that we were battling, the sacrifice of one army mule would have been sufficient. Thursday, July 2nd, a short march brought us to the battlefield of Gettysburg, and we were not long in one position, but were kept moving from one point to another, generally advancing in line of battle. On in the day, we advanced to within a short distance of Round Top. In my experience, when fighting was necessary, I always preferred being the first engaged. The most trying ordeal of a soldier is to march to the scene of action amid a mass of wounded and suffering humanity, some being borne back on stretchers, others crippling back in a pitiable condition, some bearing their ills heroically, while a chance one would make a sad lament. I also preferred a position in the regular line of battle to one in the rear as support or reserve. A support had to double-quick from one point to another, and I, when they were called on it, was to battle with a victorious exulting foe at some point where the troops had wavered or been driven back. However, the good soldier was one who performed his duty wherever placed, who kept his thoughts to himself, or, if he must grumble, relate his wrongs only in the ear of some sympathizing comrade. About 4 p.m., the enemy attacked the 3rd Corps, which held a position about 1/2 mile in front of the main line and the same distance from Round Top. We were ordered to their support, but when we double-quicked about half the distance, the order was countermanded. The enemy were advancing on our left flank with the intention of occupying Little Round Top. We were ordered to about face and double-quicked back to that point. We made Little Round Top in time, but none too soon, for a few minutes more would have given the enemy possession of that commanding and strategic point of the battlefield. And from here, my friends, I will not continue to read this. If you want to read this section, I will put it down in the link below, as well as in the show notes. Go ahead and open it up. I'm currently on page 110. If you don't want to read any further than what we've already covered, by all means, just read 100 pages, and you'll cover up everything that we did, but only from and written by the men who were in a single company in the entire regiment. I've been reading as we've been following along, and it's been incredibly rewarding, as well as to make sure that I know that I'm doing this correctly. And you definitely get a little bit more of those very interesting stories about the individuals. They're sprinkled throughout all of this. In total, the entire history is only 288 pages, which is roughly, if you've ever read The Hobbit, about the same size. And if you're a fast reader, you could do it in about a day. And if you take a little longer, or if you want to read it on your commute, You'll be able to finish it in less than a week. Now, on to our regularly scheduled programming. Now let's do our thoughts in total. First of all, we're going to talk about unit structure at Gettysburg, the 5th Corps. Now, I do have a YouTube video that covers the 1st Corps, and I'm going to include that so you can see how regiments and brigades, divisions, and corps are organized, so you can see what they're talking about when they're in line of battle and what that looks like. But I really want to talk about this do or die order that Meade gives, that you could shoot or kill any man not doing his duty. My goodness. We, as a country, have since seen how to threaten death does not work. There are other means that you can use to motivate troops, and we've figured that out long by now. Turns out, all you need to do is brainwash them in boot camp, and that is the difference between volunteers and, even though I myself was a volunteer, I joined the regular military rather than as some sort of reservist, as I doubt any of these men shouted, "Eat dead babies," when they were doing their brainwashing in boot camp like I did, especially when they were completing an obstacle course. That, of course, that explicitly stems from enemy combatants that the Marines were fighting, thinking that we ate babies. So the Marine Corps just turned it into a meme before memes were cool. What can you say? Let's talk about right before the battle, the boys singing some music. I've gotcha in my post, which is going to be episode 15, Battle of Gettysburg. I'm going to have, once you click on it, you'll be able to open it up and you'll see some links for music, the pictures in the book, and all sorts of other stuff. Now let's talk about the Company K history, which is hilarious. I will also have this linked right in the show notes and, of course, on my website so you can check it out. I have found the supplemental Company K history incredibly entertaining. And so that's why I'm going to finally include it for you guys so you can read it. It's got some great stories in it. Super easy to read. You could wrap it up in a weekend. But this DP Marshall guy, he's pretty hardcore, wasn't he? He's marching on a crippled leg. I knew dudes like that in the infantry, and I'm very proud to say I am not one of them, because I can still use both of my knees, and other people cannot. Separately, him being the largest man in the Union Army, how can you say that and not give us a height and weight? Because people were smaller back then, and I feel like we might be giants now in comparison, but I want to know how big this guy was. So it's hard to, like, I don't know, we think about Roman legionaries being super cool, but they were like on average 5'7", 140 pounds. Like they were just kind of small dudes. But now that we pump hormones into our food, you know, we're a little bit taller, we're a little bit faster, that kind of thing. So I was really hoping they would give us a weight and a height for that guy. And separately, let's talk about the biggest diss of all times. Adams County, Pennsylvania. You got called out for being worth one army mule, and I might add that the town of Gettysburg itself is in Adams County. So if you live there, dang man, you got a lot to make up for. And I'm not even sure if turning your entire town into a national monument even makes up for that burn. But what I found very interesting was the part where he talked about how he likes fighting and when he likes firing, being on the firing line, not in reserve or support. It's not something I thought about because I'm sure you can come across it, but I haven't come across it in a lot of my studies. Especially if you're trying to plug the gap and friendly soldiers are running away and enemy soldiers are like, yeah, we got him on the run. And then you suddenly have to stand in their way. It's going to be very difficult. Talk about some conflicting emotions. But with that, my friends, it's time to end the episode. By all means, check out my website, rebellionstories.com. check out the additional content that I have. I try and make it something so that you can look at it when you're standing in line at the store, but then you want to come back and check it out later when you get home. That's my goal anyway. So go ahead and open up your favorite app or whatever. Give me those likes and stars and whatever review that you desire. I need it. And since I'm not charging anyone for this, and this is free, and I'm the only one paying money here, maybe you can help me out here. Give me a review, will you? I bring this up because I've officially crossed over from just my friends and family listening to my podcast to actual real listeners. Some of you are long-term now. And I wanted to take a moment to thank you for giving me your time to listen. And it's crazy to me that I've gotten this far and that I have this many listeners now. But some of you who are just catching up into my podcast, starting to binge listen to my voice, and that is scary. But I'm glad you like it. But then again, maybe you don't, but that's why I need some reviews. So click on those 5 stars or give me a review or let me know what you think. But with that, my friends, have a great week. I will see you next week for part 2 of the Battle of Gettysburg, and we'll find out what happens. Bye-bye.
Amongst the good and true, when a robe of white is given for that faded coat of blue. No more the bugle calls the weary one. Rest, noble spirit, in thy grave alone. They will find you and know you amongst the good and true. When a robe of white is given for that faded coat of blue. He cried, give me water and just one little crumb, and my mother, she will bless you through all the years to come. Go tell my sweet sister, so gentle, good and true, that I'll meet her up in heaven in my faded coat of blue. No more the bugle calls the weary one. Rest, noble spirit, in thy grave alone. They will find you and know you amongst the good and true. When a robe of white is given for that faded coat of blue.